I hadn't appreciated that technological aspect.
Councillor Goldsack is there, so I've put him, he's in, but that's it.
So we're quorate now. Anne?
How many have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think we require one more.
Well, 6 with me.
Yeah.
Yes, Chair, sorry to chip in. You need 2/3 of the membership. The membership is yourself plus the other 7, so 6, does it?
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Now that we're quorate, I'd like to declare this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee open. This is an open meeting. It is being recorded. And on the technology, if we could stay mute unless we're talking, if you could signal with your hands. I've got the list here and I will keep an eye on those who wish to speak. And if I happen to not catch anybody's hand, please yell. So firstly, I need to ask, are there any apologies or declarations of interest?
We've received no apologies, Chair.
Okay. Any declarations of interest? No. Right, thank you. Well, the first item then is to welcome the Mayor, James Palmer, to come and talk to us and to take questions. And the way I thought it best to handle this would be that there were 3 questions submitted beforehand by members of the committee, and answers were distributed last night. So I think that we don't need to go through those questions and answers unless anybody wishes to do so, but the questions and answers will be appended to the minutes. And then after we've heard the Mayor speak, people who raise those questions have got any follow-up or any other questions they'd like to the Mayor, there'll be the opportunity to do so. I'd like to very much welcome the Mayor. It's very important from the governance perspective that the Mayor attends our meetings from time to time, and when we ask him, as we did today. So thank you. And what we're looking forward to is for the Mayor to touch on the issues of the moment within the Combined Authority, particularly in these difficult times under COVID, and to talk a little bit to us on where he thinks he is in regard to the exchanges of correspondence with Whitehall regarding the governance questions that they raised. And then afterwards, I'm sure he'd be willing to take questions, either follow-ups or questions from members who didn't put any questions in earlier. Are you content with that, James?
Of course, I'm entirely at your disposal. So
well then, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you for asking me along this morning. It's very nice to be here and to see you all virtually. And like you, I'm sure, I hope and look forward to the time where we can convene these meetings in the normal manner rather than stare at little boxes on a screen. I think that this has been a difficult time for the whole country, clearly, and a difficult time for Cambridgeshire. And I felt, from a combined authority perspective, I felt that we have borne the brunt of lockdown here in Cambridgeshire when possibly we have not had the need to be locked down, and that has caused a significant effect on the economy locally and a significant effect on individuals as well. And from the Combined Authority's perspective, we've worked very, very hard to try and mitigate where possible that effect. And you have seen, I'm sure, our COVID grants, our COVID-19 grants that we put out, the capital grants that went to businesses, over 100 businesses across the county. We have been fortunate as well in that this year has coincided with our ability to fund through what used to be the LEP and is now our business board. So in total, we've invested around £51 million into the Cambridgeshire economy this year. Most notably, obviously, you'll be aware and you will know about the success of the delivery thus far of Peterborough University and the backing for phase 2 from government with some £16 million of finance for that. And that I believe that the university will be transformational for the city, and we're already seeing the positive effect on that by other investments rolling into the city for regeneration. And of course, government has played its part with the £23 million town centres fund that Peterborough has received. Alongside that, the Combined Authority has, I'm very proud to say, through the lockdown period, been delivering on its projects across the entirety of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And it is an absolute tribute to the staff and the chief executives of the Combined Authority that we have been able to continue with delivery on projects. And there's no mean feat. And I remember looking back not that many months ago, I was under significant attack for signing off the lease on the building in Alconbury that was very, very expensive. I would not have been able to foresee that what has happened, clearly. But what we've shown is that we do not need one big shiny building to work responsibly for the people of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And the savings, of course, that we make, we recycle that funding back into investment into our economy, as you're fully aware. We have just recently set up the CAM special purpose vehicle, and I believe that vehicle will see the CAM project go from strength to strength. And again, I know that there's members on the call who are who potentially their areas will be directly affected by the connectivity that the CAM will bring. It isn't public transport network alone, of course, it is a growth platform, and I believe it will lead to better planning policy, better housing development, and better business growth across the entirety of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And our aim is to reach into the Fens and Peterborough as well, eventually, with this scheme and this system. And I think the gravitas of the individuals who have signed up to be part of this, who have actually come to interviews, I think the people who came to interviews for the CAM SPV that probably haven't done an interview in many, many years because their CV lets them walk into positions, and the quality of the people, the lexicon of projects that they have delivered across the world shows exactly by the seriousness of which this project is being taken in the wider world outside of Cambridgeshire. Much of our issues, of course, we get in politics, you get engaged and engrossed in the bubble of politics that you're in, and that's a failure of Westminster that we know, but also it's a failure of politicians, and I count myself as one of that, and it's one of those, and it's very, very important to step out of that bubble and remember that we're here to provide and deliver for the people of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and I believe that's exactly what the Combined Authority has done. We were set up by government because government wanted a different way of delivery. They wanted a bolder way of delivery, and they knew that the old system wasn't delivering in the way it should. And when that happens, you are bound to ruffle feathers. I've set myself out publicly as being a bit of an agitator, and I make no apologies for that. I lived in this county all of my life, and I'm fully aware that Cambridgeshire has tended to miss out, particularly rural Cambridgeshire has tended to miss out over the years, and so I make no apology for agitating the system. And of course, if you agitate the system, you find people are occasionally not very happy about that, and I think that's possibly the root of some of the issues I've had with MHCLG. I've always been confident that this Combined Authority has been set up in an extraordinarily transparent way, an open way. That's the kind of individual I am, and I believe that this Combined Authority is exactly set up in that image. We have, and I've said many times, we started the Combined Authority, there was me and 4 members of staff in a room. Only one of those members of staff is still with the Combined Authority, and we have, in our 3.5 years, also taken on a failing organisation in the LEP and added in adult education to the mix as well. To go from a standing start being the only combined authority that was formed on the day of my election. Every other combined authority was up and running before the mayors were elected. To go from a standing start to delivering on the projects that we have, I think is exceptional, and it shows delivery at a pace that's not been seen before, certainly in East Anglia and probably not anywhere else in the country. To have delivered on or begun work on 72% of the projects that were named in the devolution deal, a deal that's a 30-year deal, by the way, to achieve 72% of those in 3.5 years, I think is something that that our members, the members of my team and my staff, should be extraordinarily proud of. And I take, you know, I sit here and my job is to try and make sure that projects are delivered and try and make sure and oversee that we get our projects done properly. But of course, the hard work is done by the individuals within the Combined Authority, and I pay absolute tribute to them. Going back to MHCLG, the letter that we received in the summer, signed by Simon Clark, the civil servant letter signed by Simon Clark, had a number of allegations against myself and the Combined Authority, and you're aware, Mr. Pye, of the letter, and I'm sure everybody else is. We have worked through those allegations and found them almost entirely to not have backing, and it is very, very frustrating to me. And as I said, if you are an agitator, as I am, you do create enemies within the system, and there are obviously one or two of those in the area. And again, I will make no apologies for that. My job is to deliver for the people of Cambridgeshire, not to appease individuals within the system, as it were. But as I said, I believe that we're doing things appropriately. I believe that our response to that letter shows that we have behaved in the appropriate way. My authority is open to extreme scrutiny, probably the most extreme scrutiny of any similar organisation, and that's something that I'm very, very proud of. I have had discussions in the last week or last 10 days with both Chris Pincher and Luke Hall. Those were very, very positive discussions, and I hope that we will find that we have sign off on the housing fund very shortly. We signed a 5-year deal as a Combined Authority for that fund. We have already signed up to deliver, or have in the process to deliver, 1,900 homes, and that's obviously with the deadline for 2,000 being in March of 2022, and that goalpost simply cannot be moved. That's what was signed up to. Everybody who signed that deal is absolutely aware of that. Added to that, I'm extraordinarily proud of the £40 million rolling fund. I work on a basis that that you don't have handouts or live on handouts, and you try and create from the money you have the best possible solution. And the £40 million rolling fund was set up purely because we could not guarantee at any stage that we would get extra funding in the future from government. And that £40 million fund has enabled us to invest into schemes such as the housing at the RAF site in Ely, community land trusts. It's enabled us to loan finance companies who are delivering 100k homes, and of course, as that money is spent, it also comes back in, and that's what a rolling fund does. And of course, that means that that money will be there in perpetuity for Cambridgeshire to invest into housing. So I'm very, very proud of the Combined Authority. I'm very proud of the work that it has done. It's been an extraordinary privilege to be Mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and I'm open to questions from this group.
Thank you very much indeed. Could I just first ask if any of the 3 members who put questions in earlier and have now seen the responses have any other follow-up points they'd like to raise with the Mayor? And after that, if anybody else has got other questions that they'd like to raise. Nick Sanford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologise it's been a few minutes late, but I can catch most of what the Mayor actually said. I just wanted to ask a follow-up on my question about the business board of the combined authority. Obviously, this is fulfilling the functions that that normally the board of a local enterprise partnership would fulfill, and I am concerned that it holds all its meetings in private. I have done a little bit of research, and I've found that there are a number of boards of local enterprise partnerships across the country where they meet predominantly in public, but they go into private session when they need to consider something highly confidential. There's, I think the Cornwall one does that, the Black Country one does similar. So could the Mayor just perhaps clarify his sort of answer, because he didn't really address the problem as to why other LEPs can meet in public, whereas ours has to meet in private.
Well, I mean, again, I'm quite happy for the business board to do what it thinks is right. I'm a member of the business board, but I'm a non-voting member of the business board. The decision making really of whether the business board meets in private or in public is really a matter for the board and for the chairman of the board to discuss, Nick. So, I mean, the reason is very clear. We did, when we were in those meetings, we discussed an inordinate amount of issues that would be in private session anyway. So that's why it's in private. And again, I don't have a problem with public meetings, Nick, at all. But I think you have to consider the time that these meetings take and popping in and out of private session on a regular basis. And of course, the Combined Authority Business Board is not unique. There are many, many LEPs that meet in private for those very reasons. But I would suggest to you, Nick, that really that's a question that that you need to put to the chairman of the business board and to the business board, and for the business board members to discuss.
So, David Brown.
Thank you, John. Morning, James.
Morning, David.
Thanks for your pretty comprehensive reply to my question about the role of the Audit and Governance Committee. Really, it satisfied me. Anything you wanted to expand on?
No, if you're satisfied, David, then there's I can't possibly beat that. So if you're happy, and then I'm happy.
And Mark Gilsack, you wanted to ask something?
Thanks, John. Good morning, James. I haven't had an answer to my question. I don't know whether that's an administrative thing or whether the question never made it. But I can categorically tell you I've not had an answer back. So it's a very quick question, James, and one I'm sure you'll be able to answer off the top of your head. My question was about the reach of the CAM and how imperative it is that it reaches the rural areas that you've got planned, like the villages that I represent here in Isleham, and out into this direction. I can see that there's an incredibly expensive project, and an awful lot of that expense is going to be into the city. And I just want to make sure that we are not left missing at the end of it because of a lot of expenses gone into that end of the project.
Yeah, Mark, I'm sorry that you haven't seen the replies. The replies, they must have passed you by. But what I'll do is I'll read the reply to you that was put, and then I'll expand on that if that's any use to you. So, it says, "Thank you for your support for the wider vision for the area. At present, only major destinations are illustrated on the CAM network map. The exact locations of CAM stations have not been decided. Stations locations will be informed by future technical and engineering work and will be subject to consultation. To encourage the use of the CAM and a shift away from the reliance on private car usage, an affordable and integrated approach to the network is required. The CAM programme is committed to ensuring that as many communities as possible are connected to our innovative transport scheme. But the CAM is only one part of a fully integrated multimodal transport network. So while some villages or towns may not be on the CAM route, it is planned that other transport modes will integrate with the CAM. I agree that as much thought needs to be going into connecting the system into those more rural areas of our county. For that reason, I intend to ask members who are interested in how the CAM is my apologies. I intend to ask members who are interested in how the CAM cannot connect into their area, or those who might be interested in spurs off the main CAM network, to get together in the new year to talk about it. So I think, you know, I just want to back up really what you're asking us, Mark, which is, you know, what is the CAM about, really? That's the question. And I just want to categorically say this to the members of the committee. The CAM is not an underground for Cambridge. It goes under Cambridge, but is not an underground for Cambridge. It is absolutely not. I'll say it again. What it is, it's a method of connecting our county and creating a growth platform for Cambridgeshire that's sustainable. I've been involved. The reason I stood for council back in 1823, it feels like now, is because I felt that in the town that I live in, there was inappropriate development in the town. It upset me. And so it upset me enough to stand up and have my say. What I've not been able to do as a councillor or as a leader of a council is to stop inappropriate development and infill in the town that I live in or anywhere else. And what I've understood as I've gone around the county in the role that I'm privileged to have now is that inappropriate development and infill blights every single village and town in the county. CAM is an ability of moving people around Cambridgeshire, but it also creates an opportunity to focus our planning decisions and growth into new towns, which allow individuals to protect and councils to protect those smaller towns and villages across the county. The last thing I want to see in Cambridgeshire is urban sprawl. Yet the problem that we have is that we, in a non-COVID time, we create more jobs than we build houses. And that is an unsustainable situation to be in. So I'm going around it in a long way, Mark, but the reality is that CAM cannot work without its connectivity into rural areas. And it is imperative that those rural areas get the connection into and through the business parks that surround the city of Cambridge, and eventually, I hope, also into and around the business areas of Peterborough too. And that's a longer, wider ambition.
Thank you, James. Just if I can have one quick follow up on that, if I may. I totally applaud the ambition. I want to see it, as I know you do, as part of an overall wider transport portfolio, because the wonderful news of the new station in the town of Soham is great. It's fantastic. It's on track, but we mustn't stop at the build of that. We must keep pushing for the opening up of the loop to get it back into Newmarket, because then you've got real integration with the CAM plans and et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, good bon voyage with the project. Wish you all the success.
Okay, well, thank you, Mark, and I will not rest until it is delivered.
Thank you, James. There are no other hands up, but I don't know. Mike Davey, did you have a question? Yes, your hand has appeared now.
Sorry, Chair, I was waiting for the people who put their questions in advance first before I raised my question. And apologies to the Mayor, I should have done this. I got my question in advance, so forgive me. My question relates to the Climate Change Commission. To take us off on a slightly different tangent. And whilst I appreciate their report won't be coming through until February, from an audit and governance perspective, I was just wondering how you envisaged the Climate Change Commission and climate change issues being pulled into the governance and decision-making process. Clearly, it looks like a foresighted decision or proposal, bearing in mind where the Prime Minister's just recently announced in terms of turning his country into a green economy. But I just wondered how the decision-making, because clearly some of the areas of responsibility will have significant impacts upon climate change. So I just wondered about how the decision-making process might fit in, James. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks for the question, Mike. The reason that I wanted the Climate Change Commission, and let's be clear, there is a myriad of work that's been done on climate change across the world. I wanted work on the Climate Commission to inform the combined authority of how we can deliver the best possible growth in the most ecological way for our county. And therefore, I want the work of the Climate Commission to be a golden thread through our decision-making process and be part of our governance process. If that makes sense to you, I hope it does. And let me give you a clear example where I don't think we are working and where we could do better in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Those of you perhaps in the south of Cambridgeshire will understand and know the issues around water levels have been affected because of development in South Cambridgeshire. We have in the Fenland area an extensive drainage system which keeps our toes dry, as we're all aware, and we pump out billions of gallons of water, fresh water, into the North Sea every year. It seems to me that if we can, through our Climate Change Commission, find a way of diverting a portion of that water into our river system in the south of Cambridgeshire, it may well be that our development, the development that we need to sustain our economy, can be delivered in a better way that is more responsive to nature than we currently have. And I want the Climate Change Commission to inform us of that kind of issue and issues that I'm not aware of. When I signed up to Doubling Nature, I'm fully aware as an ex-farmer the reason why we have less nature in Cambridgeshire than almost anywhere else in the country. We grow the food and a significant portion of the land in Cambridgeshire is dedicated to do that. But it doesn't mean to say that you can't do things better or change the way that agriculture works in a minuscule way to create more opportunity for nature. So I'm rambling a bit, I understand that, I tend to, but the Climate Change Commission, as I said, I'll repeat, I want the results of that to be a golden thread through the governance of the Combined Authority. I hope that's an answer to the question that you put.
Thanks, James. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time. I've got one question from Nick Sanford, and after that, I think just one more from Tony Mason. So, but Nick first, please.
Okay, thank you. I didn't actually put this question in, but I apologise for that. You mentioned the Peterborough University, and I'm sure quite a lot of people in Peterborough are very, very grateful to you, for pursuing that project. Just wondered if you could actually clarify one particular point, though, because I've actually heard that there are no plans to actually have any significant accommodation that will be part of the university, and I think that does give me cause for concern, because obviously one benefit of the university will be a sort of higher education facility for people in Peterborough, but those places that have universities get an awful lot of benefit from people coming into the town, and creating for themselves cultural services and that sort of thing. So I just wondered if you could actually clarify that point.
Yeah, absolutely. So the early phases will not have accommodation, and that's for one main reason. The ambition to deliver the university for Peterborough has been heavily informed by the Spear report, as I'm sure you're aware. And the education attainment level in Peterborough is extraordinarily low, and the need for the university is underlined by the need for people with the education that the university will bring them to work in the economy of the Peterborough area. So the ambition is for Peterborough, the early stages, the early years, for Peterborough University to be filled with people from North Cambridgeshire. That's the ambition. So people will be able to live at home and enjoy the university experience. But Nick, I want to assure you that as the university grows, accommodation will be part of that. So accommodation will be built for the university in later phases. But that's the thinking behind the initial building of the university.
And we have just time for this one last question from Tony Mason.
Morning. I'm sorry, I've got a number of questions, but I'll try and combine them all. I mean, I praise the Mayor for his COVID support and his capital growth that he's given out to the companies around the Greater Cambridge area. And I just would, a quick question would be, is that still open, and is there a closing date around that? On his response around the business board, that actually leads into, we have the CAM special purpose vehicle. What is the relationship with the CAM special purpose vehicle and this committee? Will this committee have interactions with the CAM special purpose vehicle? And on the MHCLG report, whilst there are issues that have been raised in the report and EY have gone through it, I have concerns, and this is on a wider nature, that I think this committee needs to consider putting in place standing inquiries to the officers at each meeting in the same way as EY when they have meetings with the officers to ensure that if there is breaches of laws or regulations or any threatened litigation, that this committee is aware of them. Because it seems that in the response that EY have put forward, there were advice from lawyers that was incorrect, and then actions had to be taken that this committee wasn't aware. That's separate from my questions. But if the Mayor could answer my questions, thank you.
Okay, certainly. Hi, morning, Tony. Firstly, the COVID support grant, it was £5.9 million, hugely oversubscribed, and it's all gone. I would love there to be another £5.9 million to invest in our economy. Our ambition is to wrestle the business support grant work that government does and devolve it into Cambridgeshire, and then repeat some of the work that we've done with that COVID support. I've been out to visit businesses already, some dozen or more businesses, and the effect that relatively small amounts of money, the most is 50,000 that I've been to a business, the smallest is 6,000. The effect that money has had on businesses is extraordinary. You can see, talking to the business owners, the employees, having direct grant, being able to get hold of the money quickly, invest in new machinery, invest in their company. That people are astounded that it was available. That it was such a positive thing, and as we know, it created jobs during lockdown. I believe it will continue to create jobs. I spoke to several business owners that are saying we just need to wait for the Brexit deal, and then we're going to bring more people into our company. So I would love there to be more, Tony. Unfortunately, it's gone, and we will have to we'll continue to invest in the economy in other ways, training, skills, etc. Secondly, the SPV and the audit governance. So the SPV has been set up as a body that takes the CAM delivery slightly away from politics, but it doesn't mean it takes it away from scrutiny. Clearly, Ms. Sawyer is on the call. She's the chief executive, and perhaps she'll come in if I say anything wrong. But I would expect you to. There would be clearly there are audit and governance rules and laws that must be adhered to, and the SPV, while separate from the politics, that means. When I say separate from the politics, please let me explain that. I don't know how to engineer a public transport network like CAM. I can have the vision to this to say what we need in Cambridgeshire, but that's not my skill set. So that's what the SPV is set up to do. So we don't want idiots like me going in and telling Lord Mayor or others, oh, you just want to put that tunnel there and you want to build that bit out there, or you need to put a railing on that piece of station. That's for the engineers and that's for the professionals. It doesn't mean that it's separate from scrutiny and audit and governance. Of course not. It's funded by the Combined Authority, and it will be delivering for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And your third point, I think that's a matter for this committee. If they want to request different ways of looking at things, if that's what you want to do, I think my staff have been open, as you've said publicly, Chairman, and we are here to serve you and to serve the people of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. So we are open, transparent, and happy to be challenged. I think that's important.
Thanks very much, James. And I think, Tony, your point that you raised regarding we could take up the MCLG letter, the alphabet soup. We could you bring that up again when we look at the report from external audit? And that would be a good hook to have a discussion about that. James, thank you very much for coming today virtually and for answering the questions and taking questions in the way you have and bringing us up to date. It's very important to the committee that you join us from time to time, and we look forward to the next occasion. But for today, I just like, on behalf of the committee, to thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for asking me along. And also, I would like to end by thanking the committee for their support in responding to MHCLG. And, you know, it sometimes can feel, this is a strange thing to say, I suppose, but as mayor, it can be quite a lonely role, really, because I don't have a council, I don't have a chamber, I don't have a parliament to engage with. I really just have the Combined Authority Board, which, you know, but your response and your support was gratefully received, and I'd like to thank you, Chairman, and thank the committee.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, if we could move on after that to item 3 on the agenda, my announcements. On timing, thank you for joining at 9:30. We arranged it earlier so that we could give full justice to be able to talk and listen to the mayor. But we do have a deadline that at 12 o'clock we will switch. We'll end the but we will by 12 o'clock have ended the meeting, so that we can have the workshop led by the NAO. And my hope is that we can conduct business to finish by 10 to 12. And that will really be up to us to try to bear that in mind as we go through the business. And I'll try and feed in a break later. So we have Eileen Murphy will be talking to us from the NAO on value for money, and the other audit committees within Cambridgeshire and Peterborough have been asked to join us. But we will close the meeting. The public will no longer, and we'll have a private development session. I have one announcement to make regarding fraud. Officers have become aware of 2 recent attempts to defraud the Combined Authority funds. Both these attempts were made by fraudsters intercepting emails and changing bank details in an attempt for payments to be made to an incorrect bank account. Our internal auditors, RSM, were made aware of both attempts in accordance with the Combined Authority's anti-fraud policy. And RSM are working with our IT and security providers to establish the course of events and whether any Combined Authority email account has been compromised. I'd like to reassure members that the Combined Authority has not lost any funds as a result of these fraud attempts, and that we will get a report from the internal auditors in due course after they've had the opportunity to look through events and any lessons learned. This follows on, as some members will recall, from last year. There was an attempt at fraud too on the Combined Authority, which was unsuccessful in the sense that no money was lost. So I think it's a timely reminder that it's good to see that the Combined Authority's procedures seem to be effective so far in dealing with fraud attempts, but it's a high risk area, and we look forward to the internal auditors giving us a report after they've looked into the situation. So those are that concludes the chair's announcements. And I'd like to move on, if I may, to the minutes of the last meeting, item 4. Are we happy to, are there any comments on the minutes, or are we happy to approve them? Nick Sanford?
Yeah, in the minutes of the meeting on the 24th of September, paragraph 3.4 says that the assurance framework would be received at the November meeting of the committee. alongside a member officer protocol and a protocol for appointments to boards and commissions. Apologies if I've missed emails about this, but it's not actually on the agenda for this committee. So is it going on the agenda of a future meeting?
Yes, the intention is that in the January meeting that we will have time and we'll table the assurance framework. I don't know whether officers have any comments. No. So
If I may, Chair, that is the case. It's coming in January.
Okay, lovely, thank you. So with that question, are we happy to approve the minutes? Right. Oh, sorry, Mark.
Yeah,
Mark
sorry,
Rose.
John. Are we using the raised blue hand, or are we waving profusely?
No, the hand, but I missed it.
Okay, it's not a problem. It's a semi-humorous note. If you look at the resolve section of 4.4, I'm a little bit worried about the pension, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I think it says FUD rather than fund.
Okay, right.
FUD always meant fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and I hope there wasn't fear, uncertainty, and doubt around our situation.
Okay, well, my normal colleague who provides editorial scrutiny missed that one, and I did too.
No problem.
Thank you. Okay, so we've approved the minutes with that minor correction that will be required on the spelling of fund. Could we just move on now to the action list to see if there's any points people want to raise? I did ask, and I'm very grateful to officers that we've reorganized the list so the open items appear at the top. Does anybody have any comments, or are we happy to take those as standing? Okay. Right. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the Lancaster Way update, which John Alsop will introduce, and I think we'll be joined by Graham Hughes from Cambridgeshire County Council and Joe Manning and Holly Davis from KPMG. Just to remind ourselves that we were asked to look at this issue and there's been work has taken some time to produce the report that we have in front of us today. The job for us, I think, is whilst I think it says in the papers note, we will at the end need to decide where we go from here, whether we want any more work done and the like. So I'll welcome those who've just joined, Graham and Joe and Ollie, and hand over to John Alsop to take us through the item.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to provide the committee with an update on the independent value for money review of the Lancaster Way project, as jointly commissioned by the Combined Authority and Cambridge County Council. And as you say, that was following a request from the Transport and Infrastructure Committee to the Audit and Governance Committee to commission the review. That's now been completed by KPMG. And since receiving the report, which is shown at appendix, reviewed and considered the findings and recommendations, and have prepared a joint response, which is shown at appendix C. In summary, the Combined Authority and the County Council accept all the recommendations of the audit report, and the committee will see from the response that a large proportion of the recommendations have already been implemented. And it also sets out an action plan for future improvements. And we have Joe Manning and Holly Davis with us, hopefully to provide us with a summary of their report. And also, I think we were due to have Paul Rains, who is the Director of Delivery Strategy at the Combined Authority, and Graham Hughes from the County Council, who are also here to respond to any further questions that the committee might have. So I'd introduce Joe and Holly, but perhaps in particular, if they could pick out aspects of the value for money focus on the review. So thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Morning all, I'm Joe Manning. I'm a director in KPMG's Infrastructure Advisory Team, joined by Holly.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for inviting us to join you this morning. My name's Holly Davis. I'm a manager in the Major Projects Advisory Team at KPMG.
So I'll just quickly touch upon scope, then cover how we approached it, how we delivered it, reflect on any limitations, and then just sort of land a couple of key context points with you before Holly introduces the findings. So we're obviously not going to go through the full detailed report because there's a lot of information in there, but we will get across the key points, and please ask questions as we go through. So the scope and purpose, we were engaged by the Combined Authority to undertake an independent review into the Lancaster Way project. The review was to consider governance, decision making, and the management of the project. So the purpose of the review was to understand the lessons learned for the benefit of future projects, as well as together with other information available to the Combined Authority to help inform the understanding of value for money in relation to this project. So our approach is typical for this type of review. So we started in August, I think we submitted our report in September. We followed our standard sort of phased approach. So we generated a document request list. We obtained and reviewed some 90 documents. We held stakeholder interviews with members of the Combined Authority and Cambridge County Council. We had 19 separate interviews, so we spoke to some interviewees a number of times. We went through a factual accuracy process to confirm our observations with the interviewees. And then we had a series of stakeholder meetings with John and others to agree the shape of our findings. Just reflecting on the sort of overall engagement, so it was positive. So John was our liaison person. Information was provided promptly. We got what we needed, and people made themselves accessible to us. So that was positive, and enabled us to deliver the work efficiently. Just reflecting on one point of context for our work. So our work reviewed the issues, provided recommendations, and we're aware that the recommendations have been accepted, but we don't validate the implementation of those recommendations. So we understand that a number of them have already been implemented. We haven't looked at that, so that's not part of our scope. Just in terms of the project and what the key things that characterized this project. So inception was in 2011. Originally, the construction of the BP roundabout would have been about 5 months. Forecast completion for BP in Lancaster is around about now, I think, November 20. So you've got a 9-year period for a relatively small scheme. So it was characterized by scope change. You started with 1 roundabout, ended up with 2 roundabouts. Originally, the BP roundabout was developer funded 100%. That changed throughout the development process, and it was partially, the final solution, it was partially developer funded up to a cap, top-up funding by the Combined Authority, and then funding for the additional scope roundabout by the Combined Authority. I think it's important to note that accountability and ownership of this project throughout that prolonged period was fluid, and there wasn't a clear accountable owner, single owner all the way through to drive the project forward, and that's a key point. So we identified 7 key observation areas. Against that, we had 5 thematic recommendations, things to address. And I'll pause there, but then I'll let Holly walk you through those recommendations and key observations. But are there any questions on scope and approach? Shaking heads, okay. Thank you.
Super, thanks Joe. So as Joe mentioned, we've made some findings in some kind of thematic areas against which we've made some recommendations, all of which, as John has explained, have been accepted. So what I'll do is just outline the headlines of the findings that we made and the resulting recommendations that we had. So the first of those finding areas was in relation to scope and definition. So as Joe had alluded to in his context introduction, there was a kind of poor clarity around the baseline scope of the project. And from that, we saw then a lack of change control on authorising changes away from that baseline scope. Allied to that, there was a cost increase on the BP roundabout itself. That was around 570k between August 2018 and January 2020, and that wasn't supported by a formal change control process. The recommendations that we made in response to those findings were to enhance the governance and control, in this case specifically around change control, to introduce a formal change control process with its complementary delegations of authority and escalation processes. And then in respect of baselines, we recommended that capital projects of this nature would have a baseline scope and accompanying baseline master schedule and baseline estimate, which incorporates best practice in managing uncertainty and risk. Our second finding area is in relation to early stage cost information. So again, as Joe had outlined in his introduction, this project was really characterised by a multi-stakeholder environment. The business case process, which has subsequently been introduced in the guidance developed by John's team, wasn't followed. We saw a reluctance to communicate a cost estimate until the design was in a very detailed or mature state, which appears to have led to a lack of appreciation of the additional scope, i.e. the additional roundabout. So the recommendations that we've made in response to that are again around governance and control. So in this instance, specifically around formally defining project ownership and in that multi-stakeholder environment, the respective roles of the parties in that relationship. And then again around baselines, so developing an effective cost baseline which would address the concerns around not releasing cost information whilst the design was immature by introducing a mechanism to deal appropriately with optimism bias and risk allowances. I'm going to go through these quite quickly because I'm mindful of time, but if there are questions that you want to jump in with, please do that. The third finding area was in relation to the funding and delivery arrangement. So as Joe had outlined again in his introduction, originally the developer was originally accountable for the delivery of the BP roundabout, whatever that might ultimately cost. Cambridge County Council adopted responsibility for the delivery of that, although the mechanism, i.e. the paperwork that would support that, wasn't clear. The feasibility report itself introduced the additional Lancaster Way roundabout, and again, Cambridge County Council took delivery responsibility for this, but at that time of its introduction, there wasn't an agreement about who would bear the construction cost. The forecast cost of both of the roundabouts increased progressively from the feasibility study, and ultimately a decision was taken to cap the developer's contribution, and the majority of the remaining funding, as we know, was met by CPCA. It's not clear what advice was taken or what options were considered to mitigate the risks before arriving at the decision to cap the developer's cost exposure and transfer that to CPCA. So in response to that, our recommendations again centered around governance and control. And in this instance, our recommendations specifically were around forums for decision making and discharging responsibilities, and articulating the roles and responsibilities of key project members in those points that I had touched on earlier. Our next finding area related to affordability and value for money itself. And so we had followed the audit trail of where we could see provision being made for the capital scheme. So CPCA's provision in the MTFS we were able to determine was the residual grant funding given to the developer in 2016, and ultimately a further circa 1.9 million was required to progress the project. The implications of that are that the Lancaster Way roundabout effectively had no confirmed construction funding between its identification in the project in August 2018 and March 20 when the additional funding was made available. There was no funding allocation similarly for the additional cost of the BP roundabout prior to March 20. There's no business case, so there's no formal articulation of project benefits against which to reach back to that value for money. So the recommendations we've made in this area again are around enhancing governance and control, as we've discussed on a number of the other points. But then secondly, to supplement the CPCA framework with further best practice guidance, particularly surrounding sources of funding, value for money, what that would constitute and how that's articulated in benefits, and what available procurement solutions there are for the capital projects being brought forward. In estimating uncertainty and risk, so these are quite technical points about the compilation of estimates. In the estimates we reviewed, we found a very high level approach to the quantification of risk. And throughout the project's delivery, we found a similar high level approach to identification and mitigation of risks, with risks captured in different forms in different places and different reports. So the recommendation that we had made as a result was to really formalise that risk management approach and capture best practice to include the process for identification and management of risk throughout the life cycle. And then how in technical terms that's gone on to be quantified through estimates and informs contingency taken into capital projects. On reporting itself, so we do try and identify examples of good practice as well, and we had seen a highlight report that had been introduced towards the end of our focus period in this project, which was particularly good standard and had introduced a lot of very beneficial information. In some of the earlier reporting that we had reviewed, we had found there was a lack of some key information that would have been useful to decision making, such as total estimated outturn cost or remaining contingency. As we've discussed around baseline, the lack of baselines did make interpretation of the reporting somewhat challenging. And in the preparation of the reports themselves, noting the multi-stakeholder environment, we found some evidence of some challenges in the preparation, some poor alignment, and a lack of single source of truth. So the recommendations that we've made in response to that are to build on that new CPCA highlight format that I mentioned, to develop a consistent reporting format to capture the pertinent information throughout the project life cycles. And on multi-stakeholder projects, those clear articulations of roles and responsibilities that we've mentioned would contribute to the effective preparation of reporting information. And then finally, on duration, we were asked specifically around the duration of this project, and we had found that there were poor clarity in accountabilities for driving the project forward at various stages in its life cycle, and that was definitely impacted by the project complexities and the changes in the stakeholder relationships. And as Joe had outlined in the context that he provided, the project's duration was around 9.5 years in total, and that compares to a total construction duration, i.e. for both roundabouts, of around 8 months. So the recommendations that we've made in response to that are back to the points we've been making about baselines. So to set an effective schedule baseline at project inception with roles, responsibilities, accountabilities, and key milestones very clearly defined as part of that. Okay. I'm very mindful I went through that at pace, so I'm just going to pause there, and then we'll leave the floor open for any questions people have on our reporting.
Thank you, Holly. David Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Joe. I was going to ask about value for money, and which seemed to be distinctly lacking in the report, although it was in your remit. But actually, Holly's presentation has clarified that for me as to why, because it was missing in the first place. So you couldn't really do much about reporting on it. So thank you for the presentation. I'd also just like to comment as much, really, because the joint statement from CPCA and the County Council sort of indicates, oh yes, everything's great, everything's fine. I assume that that is on the basis of our next agenda item, because much of this is about change control, and our next agenda item is actually looking at how we merge in change control with risk management. So I think maybe the joint statement is a bit over positive, since we haven't actually put in place the change control stuff yet. But finally, I had cause to go to Witchford Recycling Centre last week, and as some of you know, I live considerably south of Ely. Graham, you all lot have done a fantastic job on that roundabout, and Paul. So, as far as I'm concerned, travelling from Burwell up to Witchford Recycling Centre, it's value for money getting around there an awful lot easier than it was before.
Thank you, David. Mark Gilsack.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, my point here is, that, and I guess, you know, I'd like to thank you for that report. Thank you very much, Holly and Joe. I think that answered a lot of questions. I think there's a point that we are missing collectively here, and that is that we can talk about the individual roles of the authorities and whoever was engaged, but the real stakeholders here are the residents of Witchford, the people that work at Lancaster Way, the residents of that side of Ely, the users of the A10, etc., etc. And I'd really like to see, I mean, I hear the words that Holly has mentioned. Ownership has come out as a big factor for me on this, but, you know, this will be a 10-year run for an 8-month construction project. I'm sorry, but that, you know, we've got to learn from that and make sure that we don't fall down this again. 10 years from Section 106 allotment to completion of build for an 8-month build project. I'm sorry, that, you know, can do better, must do better, I think, not just for ourselves and learning from it, but for the people of East Cambridgeshire and for the next project, wherever that may be.
Thank you. Mike Davey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Are we able at this stage to talk about the joint response, which is probably where my question relates to, Chair? Is that okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, it's page 64 of the papers, and in joint response, it was relation to the section on effectively setting baselines, which kept on coming up through the presentation. Bearing in mind that the combined authority is in essence all about multi-stakeholder environment, and the projects are going to be more complex and more tricky, I was really wanting to look at the future and how under that section, whether the respondents were confident that that actually answers, because it looks to me like whilst the financial proposals to manage in the future are there, although probably need reviewing, it's about things like introducing a master schedule for all projects from project inception, and it still feels a bit as though we're looking at how to do stuff rather than what we are doing. And I suppose it's about how we're going to review and manage the process over the years, particularly, as I say, going back to Councillor Goldsack's point, it's likely that projects are likely to become more complicated, not less complicated. And it's about reassurance, I think, Chair, about how we're taking that forward in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Would officers like to respond to that, or the County Council?
Chairman, I'll pick that up, and clearly Paul Rains may wish to add to that on behalf of the Command Authority as well. I think on Councillor Davey, I think it's, you know, it is a good point. I mean, we've noted jointly in the papers around you know, the things that have been put in place and things that we're looking at putting in place. I mean, it is something. I think really all I would say, Councillor Davey, is something that we need to work on continually. I mean, it's absolutely critical to get that information flow through to allow appropriate plans to be made, financial systems to be updated, and so on. So I agree with you. I think that we now do have some much better systems between our two organisations, and I think that's really important for members of this committee to understand and hopefully accept that we have moved on from where we were. But it is something we need to keep a very close eye on and make sure that we do embed those and keep that information going through. But I think with the plans, and as you say, you're discussing on your next item, with those plans, I think we will make a very significant move forward together on that basis. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Perhaps, Chairman, if I just come in on the back of that and very much agree with what Graham said there. I think, in particular, the point about continuous improvement is important here, and both Councillor Brown and Councillor Davey have focused in on the way, you know, your next item, you'll be looking at change control. In fact, we were having discussions yesterday about identifying upcoming risks on projects, which are of a quality that just weren't taking place 2-3 years ago. But the journey of continuous improvement obviously has to carry on.
Thank you.
Thank you both for that reassurance. Appreciate it. Thank you.
So I think that nicely brings us to what do we do next from an audit and governance point of view. Presumably we need to there need to be feedback to the Transport Committee in a formal sense. And as people have said, the next item will look at the overall changes which are going on in process and risk management. But do we feel it would be useful to have an update at our next meeting in January on the progress of the actions against the recommendations which have all been accepted? Would that help? Okay. So if we could...
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to say, particularly as it'll help us to learn for the future. I think that's the key bit, because the structures that'll be in place will assist us in the future. Okay,
well, that's very helpful. And if we could make that an action for a progress update against the recommendations and any other lessons or insights that have come as you work your way through them at our next meeting, that would be very good. Are there any other points that John Alsop or colleagues wish to raise? Or are we grateful for the insight? As we say, this was 10 years, so it's very government-like, of that all the furniture got moved and all the players got moved at different times over that long cycle. And hopefully the fact that the combined authority is at the centre now of so many multi-agency and organisational projects, it won't take so long to build the next bit of Rome. Okay, thank you very much, KPMG and Paul.
Okay. Thank you for inviting us.
Okay. Right. If we're happy, we can already advertise the next item a couple of times. We could go on to the paper on the relationship between risk and change, which Francesca Houston is going to introduce. And we are to consider recommending the adoption of what we're about to hear to be accepted by the combined authority. So please have that task in mind as we hear what Francesca's got to say. Francesca, please.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. This time last year, I was co-presenting the updated risk management strategy, which has now been embedded within the CPCA. As the CPCA evolves as an organisation, so should its governance and project management procedures, which includes risk management. In the risk management strategy, it outlines how risk should be qualitatively assessed and provided with a RAG rating for both an inherent and residual score, which is used within the corporate risk register. In the relationship between risk and change control document, Appendix 2, this further explores how we manage risk. The document confirms the new CPCA risk appetite and tolerance levels for all projects. Risk appetite is the amount of risk CPCA is willing to accept and tolerant, and risk tolerance is the level of risk that can be accepted per individual risk. We also ask risks to be financially assessed when appropriate. This, with the accepted levels of appetite and tolerance, allows us to build contingency into our projects. This contingency can only be spent through using early warning and change control processes. The paper introduces the relationship between risk and change control document and highlights the key updates within that document. If any of the committee members have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Francesca. I think you managed to zip through 50 pages quite quickly there. There is a lot in here, but if one looks at the size and shape, it's reassuring the way it coheres. But members, do we have any comments or thoughts or questions before we decide whether or not to recommend its adoption? Mike Davey.
Forgive me if I've missed this, Francesca. There's a key relationship between this committee and the board of the combined authority. And I wonder if you had any ideas, and as I say, forgive me if I've missed it, how often we should be reporting to risk to the board.
Thank you. So in the original risk management strategy, there is a roles and responsibilities table. As you're aware, the corporate risk register does come to risk every quarter. My recommendation would potentially need to go to board at least every year.
David Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, I've found this pretty easy to read and follow. So congratulations, Francesca. It's a good paper. The only thing I thought it was missing really is if this process is not followed by officers, does it become a disciplinary procedure? And I think that should be in there if it does. And personally, I think it should.
Thank you. That is something that will have to be passed on to the corporate management team regarding that.
I appreciate that, but you know, there's little point in us agreeing, right, this is the right way that people should be doing. But if people don't do it, they need to be reminded that this is what they should be doing.
Can I perhaps answer that, Councillor Brown? I think the point here is that we are, through these processes, trying to put in enough systems so that officers have clear guidance and are fully supported to do their job. What we don't want to do is create a culture where officers are worried about what their next steps might be. What we need to do is put an appropriate network around them, which ensures that they have the proper guidance and the proper managerial support to deliver these processes and projects in the proper way. If an officer clearly deliberately flouts that, having been given proper training and all the appropriate support, then of course it does become a disciplinary matter. But I think first we need to work on ensuring that we are supporting our officers appropriately and do everything we can as a managerial team to ensure that they understand what their role is. And that will be our next step around the change control process. So that's how I propose we take it forward. I hope that answers your question.
That answers, and fair comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Gulsack.
Yeah, just a point to add really. I agree with David. I thought this was an excellent approach, an excellent report. The whole nature of the CPCA is project and innovation, really. We certainly don't want to be what is being alluded elsewhere, where the standard answer from somebody is no, because that then means they don't have to do anything and don't have to be accountable for it. We want the CPCA to be the standard answer. That's possible. Yes, let's have a look at it. So I actually applaud you for these, and I would have no problems in adopting the recommendation.
Okay. I just have one. I don't see any more hands up. One question. I think it comes in the next paper, but it's the same thing really, about staff understanding the risk management arrangements and the risk register. And what in one of the pages it says that all staff need to know about it and apply it. And Kim sort of touched on it, but how is the combined authority going to get this in one level simple but in detail complicated message across to everybody on the staff? Silence.
I was waiting for Francesca to come in first to outline what's been done. So
yeah. So in terms of what's been done, I myself have delivered training in an all-team meeting at CPCA to make sure that everyone has been aware of the risk management strategy since it's come in place, since its adoption from the January board this year. I've also spent time with individual directorates and sat with them in terms of what they want to get out of risk. So help them put together their portfolio risk registers and also gone through some risk management training. We did plan to deliver some more substantial training, but obviously, unfortunately, due to COVID, those plans were put on hold. But that is definitely something we will look to do in the future.
Okay, thank you. Kim, did you want to add anything?
Yes, so just provide a wider reassurance around that we operate something, well, we have a team meeting, and at those team meetings, I'm very clear that it's highlighted key issues that are going on. So we've had team meetings around the constitution and governance arrangements and about risk. We also have something called a lunch and learn, and so we all get together and we talk in groups during lunchtime sessions about key issues within the organisation. We also have a very healthy training budget, and as Chief Exec I've been very insistent that we have a healthy training budget, because it's vitally important that each of my officers have a key set of skills that enables them to do their job properly. And we identified one of the quite early on that contract management, for example, was a key skill that not every officer had, and so we brought in some specialist training around that, and we continue to do that in relation to all of the key essential skills that officers are required to have. So I hope that offers some assurance that we do have a network of support around the officers for these matters.
Thank you very much, Kim. So is the committee happy that we recommend the adoption of this work to the Combined Authority Board? And Francesco, you got the glowing comments from members, so well done for something, getting across something which is so complicated in a way that has gone down well amongst us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
If we can now move on to the corporate risk register itself, which we are asked to review and propose any changes, and Dermot is going to introduce, I think.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is your report you receive at each meeting on the risk register. If I can direct members' attention to paragraphs 2.4 and onwards, and they set out what's changing in the risk register. So 2.4, it refers to risks relating to the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's been split in three, and they're, for later reference, they're risk numbers 14, 16 and 19. And they have been split in three, so that there's one risk around the threat COVID poses to the operation of the Combined Authority. There's then a second risk around the short-term impact of the pandemic in economic terms on delivery of the Combined Authority's objectives. And then a third risk is that risk, but for the longer term. 2.5 refers to a further risk. This is risk 17, which is to do with unplanned increases in budget for highways and transport schemes. So there is some link towards the report you've considered previously on the Lancaster Way scheme, and this is about managing those risks. As you can see from paragraph 2.5, that's potentially significant because these can be seven-figure sums. 2.6 is the Brexit risk, and what's changed there is, sorry, just to state the obvious, Chair, so at the end of the year we will be in a new arrangement, and at this point in time my understanding is it's not clear what deal or whether any deal will be struck with the European Union. So there's a lot of uncertainty. It's not so much managing the risk of something we understand exactly what's going to happen. At this stage we're managing the risk where we don't know as yet what those new arrangements will be, what any transitional arrangements will be, and so forth. So this is the Brexit risk at 2.6, and there's the short-term risk is one part of it, which is on the delivery of the Combined Authorities Growth Ambition Programme, and then split out is the risk of the longer-term impact of Brexit. Finally, in terms of the changes to what's been happening on the risk register, a risk has been escalated onto the corporate register from housing, and this is to do with the review of the housing programme. And I think the Mayor in his presentation earlier referred to the discussions he'd had with MHCLG on that. As members will see, there are risks that are at red and amber, and the risk strategy requires that where there's a red risk, there has to be an immediate action plan in place to deal with that risk. And for the amber risks, there either has to be an action plan or close monitoring of the risk, depending on what's appropriate. For completeness, Chair, remind members that internal audit are doing a review of risk management, and that will the outcome of that review will be reported to the January meeting, and that may lead to changes both in our policies and in how we present information in the risk register. But the large part of that work is actually checking that we do what we say we do in the risk strategy when it comes to actually managing the risks in front of us. So if I pause there, Chair, and then if members have any questions, myself and my colleagues will do our best to answer them.
I don't see any hands raised. I have a, I do now, Tony.
Thank you. Two questions. One is around those items that have been moved off the risk register that appear at the bottom, that have been moved off to the corporate services risk register, whether we will have notification of those items or whether they will disappear from our visibility. And going back to the earlier announcements around the potential fraud, I don't see on the risk register, and I think it's been raised in the past, an element of cyber risk. And I speak from experience, having been working for a company that was exposed to a cyber risk last month, that this is something that is internationally of concern, and it should be on everybody's risk register. So is there an element that it is not seen as a risk, or could it be put on the risk register?
If I start off with a response to that, Chair, and then my colleagues can chip in if
yes,
they have anything to add. So in terms of, as the Councillor's noted, the shift to having some matters on the corporate services risk register rather than the corporate risk register, the intention is to bring just the corporate risk register to this committee. The thinking behind that, Chair, is that we have a hierarchy of risk registers that are set out in more detail in my colleague's report on risk and change management, which reproduces the risk strategy. And so you have this hierarchy of risks and how they escalate up from particular projects to portfolios and so on and up into the corporate risk register. I think trying to provide members with useful information without drowning members in too much information, I think the current view is that by presenting the corporate risk register, those are the high level risks and those are the matters that members' attention is best focused on. But obviously, Chair, we're open to suggestions from members on that. I think in terms of the a particular risk around cyber, I'll probably defer to colleagues on that, perhaps a bit unfairly, as to whether that's something we should be taking.
Francesca's going to get you out of the hole, Dermot.
Yeah, excellent.
You have to unmute, Francesca.
Apologies. It's just to say that the cybersecurity risk does actually sit on the corporate services risk register. The corporate services risk register is for our finance, HR, legal. So that's where that particular risk sits. And it obviously does talk about the training that we are to have to make sure that we're aware of potential phishing emails, etc.
Thank you. Nick Sanford.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the risk on Brexit, because obviously, you know, you mentioned the degree of uncertainty about whether we're getting a trade deal or whether we aren't going to have one. There's not much information on what the sort of impact on the combined authority could be. So could you just give me a bit more information on that?
Sorry, Chair, I just unmuted myself. So in terms of Brexit, one of the elements of it is that it could have an impact on the combined authority's ability to deliver the growth that it's effectively here to deliver. So I think that's the main issue, but it will also, in practical terms, depending on what sort of issues it throws up in terms of disruption to the transport network and so on, it may have some impacts there as well. I probably should step back from it at this point and let my colleagues help you further.
Anybody want to bail Dermot out?
I think it's one of those risks that is very difficult to quantify at the moment, Councillor Sanford, and I think everybody is struggling with it. We have put it onto the risk register. We are primed to look at the risks when I think we have some more certainty. So you know, the business and skills team are fully aware of what I think what they anticipate the potential risks might be, but until we get some more certainty, it's difficult to really give you any certainty, and I understand how frustrating that is, but we are just going to have to, I think this is a case of wait and see. If I could just briefly come back as well to Councillor Tony Mason's point, I think given that we've had the announcement at the beginning of this meeting about the second attempt, this later attempt at fraud, I think I'll give you an undertaking that we will review that. We have a corporate governance meeting, myself, the Chief Finance Officer and the Monitoring Officer once a month, and we'll look at the corporate risk register and decide whether we're going to escalate that from our corporate services register up to the corporate register. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Mike Davey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mine's linked to Nick's. It's about Brexit. I couldn't work out, particularly odd enough now, given what Kim's saying, why it's not a red risk. Because it's so uncertain, I don't see how it can be anything other than red, because we don't know what's going to happen, and particularly as it's a month away, and the impact therefore could be quite significant on, particularly as you say, the skills team. So I suppose my challenge was about why isn't it red, given we don't have a clue what's going to happen.
Who's going to answer that one, or should I try? I thought it was. Brexit was the third risk in the register. No, Mike, you're off.
If I've read the register correctly, it's red in terms of the first initial, but then the mitigations take it down to an amber. But as we don't know what we're mitigating against, I'm struggling to work out how it could possibly be moved back from a red, if I'm honest. But maybe I'm misunderstanding the process.
Well, help.
I think it means, as I said before, you know, we've identified it as a risk, therefore red, quite a significant risk. At this stage, we can't quantify the extent of that risk, but we know that we are getting prepared as much as we can, which is why that you see the second half. We've done as much mitigation as we can in where we are at the moment. That's why it's reduced down. I'll certainly keep this. It will be a very live risk, believe me, over the course of the coming months. So we will keep that under review, Councillor Davey. Thank you.
Thank you. David Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not going to talk Brexit because I'm doing that day in, day out in my own work, and I could bore you all until well past 12 o'clock. I'm coming back to the cybercrime one though. I was encouraged by what Kim said, but I would encourage her to bring it back to us, because there is a huge national focus on cybercrime as well at present, and I think it's something that this committee ought to have a view on. Thanks.
Could I just come in there, Chair, just to say that obviously we've been working closely with our internal auditors, RSM, and we've asked them. It was on their internal audit plan, and we've asked them to fast track their work on that. So that would be a full review of our IT systems, including network and cyber security. They may want to pick up on that when we come to their item later on in the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, no more comments. I'm glad that the internal auditors have sat through this session, because I would ask that when they do their review of the risk register, they bear in mind the points that members raise, the articulation between corporate and business area, and the way decisions are made about putting things like cybercrime on at the next level. I've just lost the page, but at the very last document in this item is a schematic. Can somebody help me what page that was on?
119, I believe, Chair.
119. We've always had this difficulty, I'm looking forward to my other screen, of how do you distill this complexity in a way that gives you a strategic view and allows you to see the shape of what is happening. So on page 119, this is an attempt that's used elsewhere to show the risks in their quadrants and the nature of change. Now, if you look at the key, there's a no score change because this is the first time we've seen it. It struck me when I first saw this that this was a reasonable picture of the state of the risk, and there's a lot in the red and amber which is too much for my taste, but at least you can see them, and the next time we see this report they will show if there's been any movement in those areas. So I would maybe when we get the risk report from internal audit, I'd be grateful for any comments or feedback on whether you think this is helpful. Okay, now I've got a chat, hang on. Can't keep up with all this technology. There's a chat for me. Okay, Mark Goldsack has to leave, but I think we'll still be quorate. Yeah. So Mark, please do whatever is necessary. Okay. So we've reviewed it. We've given some comments which will be reflected in the minutes, and the work will go on with the RSM review, and we look forward to the next iteration. Thank you. Are we happy to move on to item 8, which is the end of year financial statements and the external audit opinion? Sorry, Tony Mason.
Can I just request a quick comfort break?
Okay, right. Yes, all right then. 5 minutes maximum, and then the finance boys are on. Thank you. So we're back at 10 past.
Could you all mute your, put mute on and put your video on as well, please? Or turn your video off, sorry. Thank you.
10 past, please. We need Nick and Tony Mason. Nick Sanford, are you there? I'm sorry, we can't reconvene until we've got Councillor Nick Sanford to make us quorum. Nick?
Chair, while you may want to wait for Councillor Sanford, you are actually quorum with the 5 plus yourself.
Oh, okay, right. Thank you for that. So now we come to the end of year financial statements and the external audit opinion. We've got 45 minutes left of the meeting, so could we bear that in mind? And I hand over to Robert Emery to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. And I hope the request for a comfort break at that juncture isn't a reflection that the committee thinks my presentations are interminable. To start off with, I should highlight there's one amendment to the recommendations that were sent out to the committee, and that's in light of the final opinion from the auditors is only going to be ready, unfortunately, this afternoon. So rather than the committee being in a position to approve the accounts in its final form, we'll be asking the committee to approve the accounts that were sent to them and then delegate authority to the chair to approve any changes that are required to the accounts in light of the final opinion that will be received this afternoon. And obviously we'll take any questions, and Suresh is here to answer any questions you have in light of that change. Moving on from that then, one of the primary responsibilities of this committee is to review and approve the Combined Authorities annual statement of accounts, the annual governance statement, and the report from our external auditors on the accounts. You took the draft report on the 31st of July, and it was then published on our website on the 27th of August for the public to review and raise any queries. During the period until early October, there were no queries or challenges from the public that we received. The deadline for the accounts is usually earlier in the year, but due to the impact of COVID this year, it's been extended to the end of November, and thus we're bringing them now to you to get your sign off ahead of the deadline on Monday. EY's audit of the accounts is substantially complete, and as I mentioned earlier, the final opinion is expected later today. From a combination of our further internal review since the draft, EY's work during the audit, and the completion of the audit of the Combined Authorities pension provider, there are a small number of adjustments that have been made since you received the draft statement, and these have been summarised in Appendix B. EY have also provided a response in relation to a specific request from the Mayor regarding a letter received from the Minister for Regional Growth and Local Government, and that's been included for your viewing. Alongside the audit of the accounts, the Chief Finance Officer has to make a representation on behalf of the CPCA to our auditors, and the letter is then co-signed by the Chair of the Audit and Governance Committee. This makes up another of the appendices for you to review and approve. In terms of the steps we still have to go through after this, we'll have the Joint Chief Execs and the Mayor will sign the annual governance statement once you have reviewed and assuming you approve it. John Alsop and John Pye will then sign off the accounts based on the advisement of the committee today. EY will provide their final opinion, and assuming there are no changes, it can go out like that. If there are changes, we'll come back to the chair to get a revised approval. And then finally, we'll publish the accounts in line with the statutory deadline on Monday. Suresh has joined us from EY along with Dan, and they're here to provide an update on the work he and his team have done during the accounts audit. And would the committee like to pause here and ask questions now, or have Suresh talk to his section and then ask us all questions at the end?
I think we'll pause. We've got a couple of questions. Nick Sanford.
Yeah, I'm sure everything's okay with the accounts, but it just seems a bit of an awkward process that we've got our meeting this morning and we can't approve the accounts because the audit opinion won't be coming until a few hours later. How have we sort of got ourselves into that awkward
I think Suresh wants to.
Yeah, can I just
say his
clarify? We can't give you the audit opinion until you've approved the accounts. So you sign the accounts off first, and then we issue our audit report, and that's the standard process. So certain of your colleagues around this screen will be familiar with that from this week, where I've said the same thing at their committee. That's normal practice. That's not unusual.
That's fine. Thank you.
David Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, if you need or if Robert needs a proposer for that delegation, I'm quite happy to propose that. I'm sure somebody else will second it, because I've actually got 3 bits that just need clarifying, I think, in the statement of accounts and the annual government statement. I've already emailed you and Robert the annual government statement. There was just some spelling bits in there that needed correcting. Do you want me to comment on the couple in the statement of accounts now that I think need clarifying? On page 152, it's about the mayor's and members' allowances. Some clarification is needed in the wording, I think, because it starts off saying the mayor is the only member of the CPCA board who receives an allowance. But then it goes on to talk about the allowance given to the chair of the business board. So either the mayor is the only one, or the chairman of the business board also gets one. It just doesn't read right. And the second one is on page 162, and it refers to Charles Roberts being, as an officer, being a director of East Cams Trading Company. Certainly throughout the whole of the year, Charles Roberts was not a director of East Cams Trading Company because he was there when he was leader of East Cams. So I think for the sake of clarity, it needs brackets behind that bit saying when he resigned as a director. Otherwise, I think it's misleading to the public and unfair to Charles Roberts.
Robert Emery, do you want to reply?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the point about Charles Roberts. You raised it in the pre-meeting, and having checked Companies House, he did indeed resign on the 2nd of May 2019. So as you identify, it'll stay in the accounts because it was during this year, but I will comment to note that he did resign on that date. In terms of the allowances, it's an absolutely fair point. The intention there is to identify that the mayor is the only member of the board who is given allowance as a member of the board. The combined authority, the business board's chair receives an allowance as the chair of the business board, not for their role on the CPCA board. However, that is quite detailed, and we'll make sure that's clearer in the final accounts.
Thank you. Nick Sanford. Still got your hand up. I don't know whether that's the previous question.
Yeah, it's for the previous one.
Okay, thank you. Right. Tony Mason.
Yeah, just a quick question. It relates back to what I raised with the mayor in the meeting of July 31st. I did make some comments around note 6 in relation to the CFO's remuneration, and in the letter by EY's response to the MHCLG issues, they've made reference to the previous interim CFO being given a financial settlement, and this, although not reported in the 2018-19 accounts, because at that time the information was that there was no notice and no severance, the financial settlement has been put into the 2019-20 accounts as an item of expenditure. Note 6 covers the officer's remuneration and exit packages, and my point on this is, if it wasn't for the letter that we've now received, we would have been unaware that the previous interim CFO had reached a settlement, when previously we were informed that there was no notice and no severance. So that's why I think the committee needs to begin to ask these questions on a regular basis. Does Suresh feel that note 6 is of sufficient detail to provide clarity to anybody reading the accounts of that decision that's been taken in terms of a settlement.
Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so we did consider that, and I think and again, John also can correct me if I'm wrong with the detail on this, but because your interim CFO at the time was on a temporary contract, the settlement that he received wasn't a severance payment that would be reflected in that note. So that item of expenditure, I think, is within your expenditure in the accounts, but it's not separately identifiable as an exit package or a severance. So, John, am I right in my recollection of that?
I think you're right. In fact, actually, Dermot might have been closer to the details of that. I'm not sure if Dermot can.
I'm afraid I don't know what the contractual status of the former Chief Financial Officer was, Chair. If it's something I can find out and confirm to members later, that may be the way forward.
Yes, I think that would be helpful, if you could just circulate an email that gets to the root of that question. But there's a broader point raised by Tony Mason, is about the way and the extent to which we should be aware of these sort of issues. And I'd be grateful if officers would think about that and perhaps have an offline chat with Tony to try and get to the nub of the concern and see if we need to do anything to resolve that concern in a procedural way. Would that help, Tony?
Yeah, I'm more than willing to have a conversation with officers. I think, as I said, the accounts should make reference where there are agreements in place that arise from a legal consequence. I can appreciate that there is a confidentiality nature to these settlements that means that you can't go into too much detail, but there should at least be a reference. Okay. At the moment, there is nothing. Therefore, anybody reading the accounts is unaware.
Okay. If you and Robert Emery could have a conversation offline and report back to the next meeting on anything that we need to do.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
If we can make that a small action. That's all the questions. So, Suresh, would you like to introduce your report?
Yes, Chair. Thank you. So, as Robert's just alluded to, actually our audit is now complete. So, subject to you approving the accounts with the delegation that's been just mentioned, and us receiving those accounts today, we'll be issuing an unqualified opinion on those accounts and a clean value for money conclusion. And I think that's a pretty good position to be in, Chair. Apologies to all the members of this committee who've heard me say this in the last few days, but this has been a very challenging period of time for both, I think, the preparers of accounts, but also the auditors of accounts. COVID-19 has clearly had an impact in terms of some of the financial reporting that you've had to do. So you'll notice in your accounts you've got a little bit more disclosure on things like going concern, which you previously didn't have. And whilst you haven't been impacted by things like asset valuations and the complexities that COVID's arisen there, there's still been an impact in terms of how we've been able to undertake the audit and having to work remotely. Whilst again, technology has enabled us to do that, it has slowed things up somewhat, and I think it's been a bit frustrating for all of us that we weren't able to finish this work earlier than we would have liked to. But still, we're in a good position, and there's been good quality working papers provided by the finance team. They've been very responsive to our queries. And it's been a cooperative approach to get us to this position, which, as I say, is a pretty good one to be in, because I think Monday will come next week, and there'll be quite a lot of local authorities around the country who won't be publishing audited accounts for the reasons I've just mentioned about the challenging process that we've had to go through. So I'm going to ask Dan to just quickly update you on the status which we reported in the papers that you've got. There are some differences we just wanted to highlight. I just want to touch on the value for money section, which we've already alluded to, certain bits and pieces, and then I just want to close on fees. So if I ask Dan just to quickly take you through the status, please.
Thank you, Suresh, and good morning, committee members. So our report is on page 195 of your committee papers. So I'm going to start with the status of the audit, which is on page 200. So there were 2 items at the time of this report that were outstanding, and they have now been completed. Related party transactions, we did have 1 finding, which is also on page 227 in the report, where there were a number of related party declarations not returned by today's date by officers and committee members, and also a lack of documentation for collating and assessing the interest made by members and officers. We have performed alternative procedures with the help of officers to ensure that the financial statements are correct in terms of related party transactions, but that is just a finding that we have reported within our audit results report. The second item of outstanding work was REFCUS expenditure testing. This is quite a complex and one of the largest areas of the audit, but that work has now been completed. We did identify, or officers identified, 1 additional adjustment which has been made, which isn't in this report, but it wasn't material, and the officers have now made that adjustment. So in terms of the other areas that are on that list, so we have now completed our final review procedures, as Suresh stated. We've reviewed the final set of accounts that have been presented today, and we have performed our subsequent events review. So the final steps are now to receive the signed accounts and the signed letter of representation following this meeting. So I'll then move on to page 201, which sets out our audit differences. So we had 2 unadjusted audit differences. 1 related to an update from the pension fund auditor, who informed us that the Cambridge Pension Fund asset investments had increased by 17 million since the time of their draft accounts. But the combined authority's share of that increase was only £170,000, and therefore, given this is not material, officers have decided not to amend for this adjustment. In addition, our unrecorded liabilities testing, which is where we test invoices received after the year end, identified 2 invoices relating to expenditure of £382,000, which the invoices were received in 2020-2021, but did relate to expenditure in 2019-20 and were omitted from the financial statements. But given the expenditure isn't material, officers have decided not to adjust for this one, and the expenditure will obviously go through in the 2021 financial statements. So we just request that the audit committee agree to these unadjusted differences, and they will be included in the letter of representation, which will be signed by the chair of the audit committee. We've then got a number of audit differences that have been adjusted, but I won't go through those in detail because they have all now been adjusted by officers. So there's no issues with those. We just highlight them to the committee so that they're aware of some of the adjustments we've identified throughout the audit, or that officers identified throughout the audit. There is a summary of risks on the following slide, and then more detail on the risk areas from slide 205, but I won't go through those in too much detail because we've covered most of them already. Slide 205 is our standard management override risk, which we identify on all audits that we perform, and we didn't identify any management override issues. Slide 206 is our risk around REFCUS and the potential for incorrect capitalisation of expenditure. And again, we've now concluded that work, and we have found the 1 adjustment that I reported to you earlier, but no other issues have been identified. We then have the value of pensions and the pension liability. So this was the first year that the Combined Authority had the pension fund liability within their financial statements, because it had previously been accounted for in the accounts of Peterborough City Council. As I've reported, there was one immaterial difference that we identified from a change in the asset values, but no other issues have been identified from the work performed in that area. We then have an area on going concern, and I'll probably pass back to Suresh to cover the going concern element and then the value for money, and then that will conclude our report.
Yeah, it's probably less to say on going concern for the Combined Authority than there is for other local authorities, but we are clearly aware that you have looked at reprioritising your budget. I think you've issued your outline budget for 21-22, sorry, in terms of the consultation on that. So that assessment of the impact of COVID on your finances was something that we were looking at, and we're happy with the disclosure that you've made in your accounts as being an appropriate one to make. And then quickly, just on value for money, which starts on page 217 of your pack. We had three kind of areas that we ended up having to look at. First one was the risk we identified as part of our regional planning, which was looking at, in effect, how you're kind of overseeing the ambitious capital programs that you've got, and clearly reference has been made to certain aspects of that already on the committee. But we looked at it from a pretty high level in terms of the overarching arrangements, and you'll see on pages 219 and 220 that we're satisfied that you've got appropriate arrangements that we would expect around that risk. And then, if you remember, we also had some correspondence from a member of the public about your loans to East Cambridge Trading Company. We'd previously reported that to the committee back in July, so we just repeated that for completeness in this report. And then finally, as we've already alluded to at the start of this meeting, we responded to a request from the Mayor to consider the correspondence that you've had from MHCLG. And I should be clear there that our focus was aspects of those issues that impacted upon our responsibilities. So you'll see that on some of those aspects we were able to reference back to work we've previously done on your governance arrangements. Other things which we weren't aware of at the time, we've then had to carry out some subsequent ask subsequent questions to officers to ensure that we understood the issue, and we've obviously communicated our view and our conclusions in the letter to the Mayor on 30th of October, which is included in your pack. So finally then, I just wanted to take you to page 230, which is the fee analysis. As we've already alluded to in the planning documents, there's the additional areas that we've been looking at, clearly attract additional fees. We've included there our sort of indicative fees for those areas. We'll be concluding on those fees shortly and be sharing and discussing with John Alsop the detail behind those before seeking approval with PSAA. We'll stop there, Chair, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Suresh and Dan. I see no hands raised for questions, which shows that both elements of this item are convincing. We have some specific things we need to approve as a group. So we are recommended to receive and approve the final statement of accounts 2019-20, subject to those minor comments, and subject to the committee agreeing that any minor changes are delegated to me to action. I take those as nods. Thank you. We receive and approve the annual governance statement. And we receive and approve the management representation letter. Yep, that's unanimous. And we receive and note the external auditor's report. I think this is a very creditable place that both the authority and the audit process has got us, given the circumstances in which we operate. So I'd be grateful if, in the minutes, the flavour of those positive points that Suresh made at the beginning were reflected, particularly the working relationship between the officers and the auditors, which has enabled this result. Are we happy to finish that item? Okay. So we're not doing badly. We've now got item 9, which is the internal audit plan from RSM. And Daniel, are you going to kick this off?
I am, Chair, thank you. And hopefully members will recall from the last meeting, we're not going to need to go through this in too much detail, hopefully, because there's not significant changes from the sort of rather lengthier time we spent at the last meeting laying out the background to how we went about drafting. I think that the couple of key changes I'll just bring to members' attention is this plan has now been discussed with the CMT, as we've noted within the document, and has resulted in this plan from you today. Specifically, just in terms of section 2 of the report, so pages 262 to 264, all of the areas are the same that we brought to you back in at your last meeting. I think the 3 slight differences on the grant verification work, we've clarified that because you've received some additional transport funding in relation to sort of COVID and the homeschool college transport grants, that's going to be the focus of the grant verification work. We've agreed the focus of the key financial controls this year will be the accounts payable system. And as per earlier on your agenda today, you mentioned cyber, Chair, and I think John sort of alluded to the fact we were covering this and had brought that work forward. So the IT controls assessment review, that particular review is actually going to be quite wide ranging. So that will be our sort of technology team that will undertake that, but it essentially looks across the whole control framework from sort of network security, roles and responsibilities, information security policies, account management, the patch management, disaster recovery arrangements. So typically what we do when we're engaged with a new client is to sort of look at that framework across a wide range of cyber and IT controls, and the outcome of that work should then further inform future years' IT audit coverage. So that hopefully gives you a feel for what that's going to look at. I think the only other difference, Appendix B, that is slightly different from the paper you saw at the last meeting, and what we've done there is just to put some suggested timelines on some of the other areas of coverage that's obviously driven from risk registers and strategic objectives. That clearly needs to remain flexible. New risks will emerge, and indeed it won't be too long before you're seeing the draft strategy for the following financial year 21-22. So you'll have a further opportunity to sort of influence that programme of work. And then just the last point I think from me, Chair, was just to say the internal audit charter at Appendix C, it was in the last document, but as part of sort of approving this strategy, you would also be approving that charter. That's a requirement of internal auditing standards and indeed a requirement of our contract with you that we meet those requirements. So just to sort of briefly touch upon that, what that document simply does is lays out the roles and responsibilities of us as internal auditors and of officers. But hopefully that's fairly self-explanatory, but just to sort of point out why that's in the strategy as well. But happy to take any questions, Chair, given that you've obviously had sight at the last meeting of the main bulk of the paper.
Okay. So our role today is to consider and approve the internal audit strategy for 2021 onwards. Have we got any questions on the paper, or RSM has said to us, or are we happy to approve? Mike Davey? You're muted. And again.
And now trying to get back to the paper that I think I was referring to. It was to do with the, where are we? Sorry, forgive me. Yes, the appointments, the work you're going to do on appointments to boards and committees sponsored by the Combined Authority. Forgive me, Daniel, if this was covered last time. But does that include both the business board and the new CAM SPV?
Well, to be fair, we haven't scoped the review there yet. I think if there's a request that it does, then we can certainly incorporate that within the scope of the work.
Well, obviously subject to the rest of the committee, but I think it might be wise, bearing in mind that they will be doing significant work on behalf of the Combined Authority.
David Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Just following on from Mike, I mean, my understanding was that what we were asking for was the process. So it doesn't actually matter which individual board, committee, etc., people are getting on. It's how they get there, not specific boards.
No, I appreciate, David. It was just about making sure they were included. I wasn't sure if they were part of the, yeah.
Well, I think it is a process point, but it does need to be embrace such things as those raised by Mike Davey. Are we happy with that as a group? Okay, and we get your first outputs in January, do we, Daniel?
Yes, I forgot to mention actually, Chair, that both the risk management and key financial reviews, as was agreed at the last meeting, they've both commenced. Indeed, one of those I think is debriefed and is just at the quality assurance stage. The other is ongoing. So yes, you should certainly receive the final reports for both of those reviews in January.
Thank you. Well, we approve the internal audit strategy. Thank you very much. And we look forward to your first products at our next meeting. Thank you, RSM.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we're at the adult education budget. Who speaks? No?
Yeah, it's Janet Warren. I've just let her into the meeting for you.
Ah, okay.
Hello.
Janet, welcome. You're going to introduce the paper for us.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. My name is Janet. I'm the Commissioner for the Adult Education Budget. I'd like to provide an update to members on the audit and assurance arrangements for the delivery of adult education in the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority area. The Combined Authority has been responsible for the delivery of adult skills since the 1st of August 2019, and as such we have a duty to demonstrate that we are spending public money in accordance with the guidelines set by Treasury. Since adult education budgets were devolved, we have continued to work closely with the Education and Skills Funding Agency, who proposed support in audit and assurance during the first year of devolution to all mayoral combined authorities. This has included regular network meetings from key officers from each organisation and with the ESFA as a lead. I attend the meetings on behalf of the CPCA, and topics of discussion are around updates of audit and assurance work being carried out, any current or ongoing fraud investigations, intelligence sharing or provider financial health, and very useful collective group discussions. During this year one ESFA offer, we were requested to identify 3 out of our 17 funded providers to be audited in the 2019-20 academic year, who were within the ESFA's random sample. We chose Cambridgeshire County Council, West Suffolk College and TCHC Group. Due to the COVID pandemic, the external audit firms who had planned to start the audit programme in April have only just managed to start remote testing. However, this work is not yet complete on our learners, and final reports are expected hopefully by Christmas. We should be responsible for auditing all of our training providers and colleges on the adult education budget funding stream from April 2021, known as Year 2. This means we need to source external education audit firms with the relevant experience of the ESFA assurance approach and working papers, the documentation involved is vast and complicated. I've seen some of the spreadsheets. A procurement exercise has been started, and we are in touch with the 4 audit firms which the ESFA contract with. This will at least ensure continuity across the piece, and we intend to bring the appointed auditors online from April 2021, by which time we hope to be able to implement our planned compliance and quality visits with our providers. In addition to the audit programme that I briefly described, we also seek assurance in other ways, including by funding validation, where we test the data submitted by providers for any errors before we make payments. And given the ongoing pandemic, we closely monitor financial health with checks carried out by our finance colleagues to determine market stability. We have robust performance and management and monitoring processes in place, and work closely with Ofsted, ESFA and other combined authorities to share intelligence and inform compliance.
Thank you very much, Janet.
Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
David Brown.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you for the report. Excuse my ignorance, but who or what is the TCHC group?
Apologies, Councillor. They are an independent training provider. They changed their company name to the TCHC group. They were formerly the Home Consultancy Counties Group.
No other questions? Janet, when will we next get an update, do you think?
Whenever you would like.
Well, I think we need some, you've got to have some audit work ready to be able to get the assurances. Are we talking about a year, 6 months?
Happy to provide an update before a year, Chair. We have the results from the 3 audits that are taking place. Hopefully by Christmas, further meetings in January to determine the actions. It may be that we need to recover funds. So I'd be happy to come back in the new year.
Okay, well, I think that'll be, when there's some matters of substance to report, maybe in the middle of next calendar year, that would be very helpful. Colleagues, we're asked to note the update on these arrangements. I don't see any more hands up, so we just say thank you very much, Janet, and it's helps us learn some new alphabet soup every time, and the best of luck with your complicated paperwork and spreadsheets. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
That brings us to item 11, the work programme, and we've got 12 minutes to go. Any comments on the work programme?
If I may introduce it, Chair. So by way of update, at this meeting you've agreed that you want to report on implementation of the recommendations on Lancaster Way to come to January. So that will be added into the programme. There was a question earlier about the assurance framework. That's already in the programme. And also we've heard reference from your internal auditors as to the reviews they will be bringing in January, one of those being on risk. So if there's anything else I can assist members with, Chair.
I don't see any hands up. Thank you, Dermot. And the continuing improvement of the way we present this, so we get a clear understanding. Now, David Brown has got a question.
Thank you, Chairman. It's this appointment to boards and commissions. Maybe I'm missing it, and apologies if I am, but I'm not sure where it's coming in the work programme.
No, that will be the internal audit programme, I think. Yeah. Okay. With that comment, are we happy to note? Thank you. And our next meeting is on Monday, the 29th of January at 10 o'clock by Zoom. And I now officially declare this meeting, open meeting, closed. We got about 10 minutes before we have our development session. Sue, is there any advice? Should we just leave our machines on, or?
Yes, if you just leave them on, but just mute and then stop videoing, and then leave it at that, and then we'll come back at 12. That'd be fine. Thank you.
Okay. And Anne, I think you're going to introduce Eileen. What do you want?
Sorry, I'm happy to introduce Eileen if you would like.